Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven and this is the Storytime channel. Today we've got some pro-revenge stories and our first story of the day is by Quixxlez. You picked on the wrong underdog, guy. Someone just linked me to the sub and oh boy do I have a story for you guys. I'm still proud of this to this day. A few years ago, I was working in a job I really enjoyed with a team I really gelled well with. There were about 5 of us working on the same portfolio of projects in different roles, and every single team member was just cream of the crop, incredibly good at what they do. I can't overemphasize how satisfying it was to work with such an incredibly competent, likable group of people. In this job, instead of getting the Sunday night blues, I would get excited thinking about the work I would be doing the next day and planning how we would solve the complex problems together. It was like a series of logic puzzles. Yes, I realize I'm a huge nerd. I promise I also had a life outside of work. The one downside, there's always a downside, to this job was Steve. Steve was not in the supervisory line for me or any of my team members, but he was about 3 levels above us and very senior. He'd been there for years and was tight with senior leadership. Steve was also a mega creep. He said extremely inappropriate things to young women in the office, and he apparently wasn't adverse to being handsy. Though as far as anyone knew, that was as bad as it had gotten. The women in the office all knew to steer clear of him. My first week on the job, the Whisper Network made sure I knew never be alone with Steve. Sexual harassment is difficult to document, and no one wanted to risk their career and put a target on their back going after a big guy like Steve, so he just got away with it for years. So for a couple of years, I followed this advice. There were a few instances of Steve saying incredibly uncomfortable things to me in passing, but for the most part, I managed to avoid him. Then I found out that my teammate Rob had gotten on Steve's radar. For context, Rob is non-neurotypical and has some minor tic-ish behavior. He's also shy and easily spirals into social anxiety when put in uncomfortable situations. So one evening at our team's informal weekly happy hour after work, Rob lets it slip that Steve's been giving him a hard time. The rest of us are like, whoa, wait, what? Because Steve never interacts with staff at our level, except to creep on women, and we basically make Rob tell us everything. Basically, for the last few weeks, Steve has been bullying Rob, making fun of his tics and mimicking his way of speaking back to him. He's also been asking Rob how he can possibly be competent to do his job and implying he's a pity hire. Once he called him the R word. It's clear Steve is seeking out Rob for this because, again, there's really no reason for him to interact with our team. Rob has been having horrible anxiety over this situation and has had bad insomnia and stomach issues since Steve started targeting him. And not that it bears repeating, but just to reiterate, Rob is a freaking beast at his job and a genuinely good guy. At this point, I'm seeing red. We all were. We tell Rob to go to HR, that his neurological issues put him in a protected ADA class, that he could get Steve in big trouble. Rob panics and says he can't do that, begs us not to tell anyone at work, and says he wishes he hadn't said anything. We assure him we won't say anything if that's what he wants, but we're all very distressed. I leave the bar fuming, just thinking, okay, that's it. Freak you, Steve. You're going down. I can't tell anyone about what's happening to Rob because I promised him as much, so I start my own paper trail. I start baiting Steve. And I don't mean I behave in any suggestive manner or lead him on, I just stop avoiding him, and I even initiate contact myself. I IM him through the company's IM system, very professionally and politely asking if a big client will be staying on through the next project cycle. And the floodgates open. He starts sending me outrageously sexual IMs. I mostly don't respond, but I occasionally keep him going by sending extremely literal responses to his innuendo-laden questions or pretending not to understand something suggestive he's saying. Sometimes when he clarifies, I'll outright say, "This isn't appropriate," or "This is making me uncomfortable," or "Please don't say things like that, Steve." But he steamrolls right over me. During this time, I've also been seeing him more in person around the office, and he often says gross stuff to me in person as well. A lot of it not just inappropriate, but bizarre and nonsensical. Is it legal to have a butt like that in that skirt? Lol, what? Every time this happens, I immediately go back to my desk and write down what he said, the date and time, and the names of any witnesses. After about a month and change of this, I compile my creep journal with printouts of the IM conversations and take them to my HR rep. I ask to file a sexual harassment complaint against Steve. As soon as the words sexual harassment leave my mouth, my rep instantly gets the head of HR and 2 other reps, and they go through my evidence with me and ask me a ton of questions. The head of HR assures me they'll take my complaints very seriously and asks if I know of any women around the office who have had similar issues with Steve. I'm able to give them several names. They send me on my way, and 2 weeks later, my rep formally reaches out to me and lets me know Steve has been let go. Much jubilation is had around the office. It took a couple of months for me to piece together the whole story, but basically after my complaint, HR started following up with the names I gave them, both the witnesses to my in-person encounters with Steve and the other women he'd harassed. They corroborated what I told HR, and then through them, word started spreading around the office that HR was conducting a sexual harassment investigation against Steve. This emboldened at least 15 different women who had been biting their tongues about Steve for ages to come forward and tell their own Steve stories. The worst story was from a junior staff member who Steve had sexually assaulted at a company party the year prior. During all of this, IT had been asked to go through Steve's emails and IMs, and this had not only been used to validate my printouts as legitimate, but IT had found a ton of additional incriminating stuff in Steve's correspondences. Somewhat frustrating, Steve received an extremely generous severance package as part of his termination, but on the bright side, word got around the industry quickly, and Steve was poison at that point. No company would touch him with a 10-foot pole. The last time I thought to snoop on his public social media pages, he was listing himself as an independent consultant in our industry, which I seriously doubt he's actually doing, and based on his public Facebook page, he's doing a couple of MLMs, so that should kill off whatever savings he has in short order. I don't work with Rob anymore, but I did recently attend his wedding. He's extremely happy with his new wife, who is a sweet and lovely woman, and he's doing really well in his career. So to me, hearing this and how big it was, severance and letting Steve go, way too easy for Steve to get off. Do you agree with me that Steve should have some kind of legal action properly done against them? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by Oregonlost, beat a Craigslist scammer at his own game. So I was hunting for a rental house for the Valentine's Day weekend and wasn't finding much. So I popped into the local Craigslist page and found a place at a decent but very believable price. No contact info or website, so I emailed through the Craigslist relay. Everything sounds legit up until he asks me to pay using Zelle or bank transfer. Immediately knew it was a scam, but I played along acting confused because I'd never used Zelle. He sends me the Zelle info to send the payment. At this point, I reverse image search the cabin and find the actual property owner info and call them. He confirmed that he has had this scam happen before and angry people show up expecting a rental that is already legitimately reserved and demanding a refund. I give him the links and info to the fake Craigslist posting so he can report it. So now I have confirmed that this is 100% a scam, so I decide to have a go at this guy and see how far I can get. After a few more confused sounding emails regarding how to get the money to him over Zelle, I send him the request, but instead of paying him, I sent it as a request for payment. I send a few more messages saying it is not going through, and then I get a notification saying a payment has been received. Sure enough, he approved my payment request and sent me the money he was trying to get me to send him. So I had over $400 sitting in my Zelle account from a guy in Nigeria who was trying to scam me out of my romantic weekend. I definitely wouldn't want to get too involved personally trying to steal whoever Nigerian person's money is, but I definitely think it's good that OP did their part to shut down this scam. This next story is by Psychospaz, Insult my friend and he gets you and your bosses fired. I heard this story 12 or so years ago from a classmate in college. This story happened in the late 90s. He worked at a corner store with a sandwich shop in it. It was a corporate-owned chain and not a franchise-type deal. He worked in the deli on the third shift. The store would close from 12 p.m. till 4 a.m. and there would only be 2 people there from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. He was only there for about 6 weeks, but had worked in food service for years. He knew all the rules, regulations, and laws relating to food prep and storage. When he started, he noticed that they didn't follow them all that well and were not receptive to any mention of changing that. Things came to a head after he went to his shift manager about how the food was way too old to be safe to eat. His manager, fed up with him at this point, told him to freak off and that if he didn't like how they did things, he should quit. And he said it sprinkled with personal insults. He decided to finish out the shift as normal and return the next day with a small disposable camera and document everything. He then quit at the end of that shift and went home and got the pictures developed. He then made 2 phone calls while they were being developed. First, he called the state regulatory agency that was in charge of food safety in restaurants, and the second was to the corporation's HR hotline. He knew that if he just called the company, they might write him off as a disgruntled employee and not do anything. But knowing that photographic evidence was being sent to the state would get a response. And boy, did it get a response. The state took 3 weeks to get around to checking the place out. But within 3 hours of calling the company, the area manager showed up, and within 5, an inspector from corporate showed up. It resulted in the store temporarily closing, all the management staff being fired, and some of the longer-term employees being fired as well. Food safety is the #1 thing when working in any kind of restaurant, obviously. I have nothing but respect for the people that put the safety of customers first and report places that do these kinds of shady things. Nobody wants to get sick or, God forbid, seriously ill because they ate something that's way too old or safe to be being served. And our final story of the day is by LuLuLoopy. She ruined a surprise party on purpose. This happened when I was a kid. I was just reminded of it. I was about 11 and my grandmother was about to turn 75. Our family is pretty scattered around, but we made a trip every year to see her in the summer while she was alive and have a family reunion. Now, this particular year, my mom, who is Granny's daughter, suggested we all return the month after the family reunion for her birthday and a family dinner. My mom's brother and her niece, not that brother's daughter, but daughter to her dead brother, immediately jumped all over the plans. They invited half the town and it turned into a massive surprise party, excluding my mom from the plans. My mom said nothing in the plans continued. We went for the usual scheduled trip and the family reunion. We returned next month in time for the party. It was much bigger than intended, and I kept noticing my mom had this cat that ate the canary smirk on her face the entire time. We stayed in town about a week to spend time with her, and when we were all leaving, one of my aunts remarked that we really surprised Granny. It was then my mom started cackling like the Wicked Witch of the West. It turns out that when we were there previously, my grandmother was sad that we were leaving. She told my mom that she didn't want everyone to leave until my mom took the opportunity to tell her, "Don't be sad, we're coming back in a few weeks for your birthday. Don't tell anybody. It's supposed to be a surprise, but they're throwing you a massive party." She told her the location, all the details, and everyone who was going to be there, including my uncle, whom she didn't see often. After telling us all the story and telling us to shut up after we complained, my aunt asked why she'd ruin the surprise on purpose. She just grinned and said, "Because her brother and her niece had no business ruining my plans." I definitely can't be too upset about that because the granny was sad everybody was leaving. They wanted to spend more time with everybody. So the mom being able to give reassurance and say that everybody is going to be back and we're going to have a big old party must have really helped to bring the granny's spirits up, and that's important, right? I think the more everybody thinks about it for a little bit, the more they'll realize that it was an okay thing to do, let alone that it ruined their big old massive surprise party. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So, which of these stories was your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing and turn notifications on if you haven't so you'll never miss an upcoming video. Any little thing that you do helps the channel grow so much more. Whether it's commenting, subscribing, or just watching the video, thank you all so very much for supporting me right here on the Storytime channel. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time right here on the Storytime channel.